So
Okay.
what this book talks about is how sexuality, sexual liberation essentially was used as a wrecking ball for Western traditional Christian values. He frames it in terms of Catholic values, but it's Christian values as well. And I think that is probably reaching its end point as we see a lot of this like transgender nonsense, right? And like the end of the dialogue, end of the dialectic. I sometimes wonder if psychedelics are the next wrecking ball they're going to try and use.
That's an interesting comparison that you just made, because that's one of the things I've pointed out on Twitter, is that if you take a curve of the acceptance rate of gay marriage, for example, back in the 1970s, back in the 1980s, even the early 90s, a majority of people in the United States believed that homosexual acts, sodomy, should be illegal. A majority did. Today, a majority of people, overwhelming majority of people, believe that not only should it be legal, that gay marriage should be legal, that the whole thing, they're fully on board with it, should be celebrated. So just within, I mean, we're talking about a 30-year period, within many people that are listening to this podcast lifetime, there has been a giant shift. I mean, even Barack Obama's first term, he ran against gay marriage. Like, that's how fast all of this has changed. Here's the crazy thing. You compared the two, the same curve, slightly delayed, is happening on psychedelics, where 10 years ago, everybody was against legalization. Everybody thought it was bad for you. Everybody was, I was with my kids, I was watching old Saved by the Bell episodes, and they had an episode about pot that was just like, pot was the worst possible thing that somebody could do. Like, people were, it was horrific on the episode with somebody was smoking pot, and it was just like really, really bad, real preachy. You don't remember those episodes from old TV shows, but now, like, I can't imagine that episode. People would laugh at that episode. And I tell my kids, like, as a kid, driving around, I would see billboards. It was regular for billboards just to be say, don't do drugs or dare to stay off drugs or whatever. I can't remember all the campaigns. Now, like, literally a majority of the billboards, I live in Michigan where pot is legal. A majority of the billboards are saying that pot is, they're advertising buy pot from our store, or
for sale.
Don't leave our town without saying hi. And they spell hi, H-I-G-H, so like, those kind of billboards are all over the place. And we're talking about, I'm not that old. Like, we're talking about like just that transition from me being a teenager to today. There's been a giant shift in the attitudes towards pot, but it's not just pot. It is ayahuasca. It is psilocybin. It is, like I mentioned earlier, people are just changing their views, and the legalization curve is crazy as well. Like, the number of places that had legal pot 10 years ago is like 0. And now it's almost every state has either legal for recreational, legal for medicinal, or has some kind of effort to legalize it, legislation working its way through the system. And the same is happening with other psychedelics. Michigan has certain counties where psychedelics is decriminalized. Oregon has, I think for the whole state, has decriminalized psychedelics.
It's going to go real well.
Yeah. In Colorado, certain areas have decriminalized, and they're working on the whole state there. And there's other places I'm forgetting it all, but like the same process that took place with pot is happening with stronger psychedelics. And I think a lot of people is just like, well, why is it illegal? It's not addictive. It's good for you therapeutically. It's good for you spiritually. And the comparison that people always do is like, hey, alcohol is legal. So like, people beat up their wives on alcohol. Nobody does that when they're on magic mushrooms. So why not legalize magic mushrooms? Right. That argument is almost 100% of the time. Anytime I have a debate or discussion with somebody on this, that's what gets brought up.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, that's a long answer to what you said, but that comparison between the sexuality and the transformation. And you're right, the sexuality has been a giant battering ram for Christianity. I can't tell you how many people I know that were Christian kids growing up that ceased to be Christian because the church is hateful towards homosexuals. Right? That's what they told me, is the church hates homosexuals. I can't be a part of a church that hates homosexuals. So like that battering ram, or for that matter, I think a lot of people, they don't necessarily turn on Christianity, but they don't feel comfortable in church anymore because they're into porn that's almost universal all over the place on the internet, or they're living with their girlfriend and they just don't feel comfortable. So the sexual sins, whether homosexuality is a big one, but like they're also premarital sex and pornography are just widespread in culture. And I think it absolutely has been a very effective battering ram for the church. And I do think the next wave is psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. Gosh, and that people don't beat their wives on mushrooms and pot. So that makes it okay. Like that's the lowest bar in the universe, because not everyone who drinks alcohol beats their wives, and they're right. Like, why is that? Yeah. Why is that the standard? Like, and I know why it's the standard, but I go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote an article kind of explaining the differences in light of my book. If people want to check it out on my Substack, but, I think, the big thing I tell people is like with alcohol, yeah, there's downsides. And, as Christians, the Bible warns lots of times about not over drinking, not drinking too much. Don't be a drunkard. Drunkards won't enter the kingdom of heaven. Like those things are said in the Bible. But the downsides for alcohol are well known, right? We've had them throughout our history, throughout the 2,000 years of Christendom, going back to almost the beginning of civilization. We've always had alcohol as society, and we know exactly the downsides. We know, I can tell you like how many drinks it will take for me to be in a bad state, right? Like we know what it is. Doctors know what it does to your brain, how long it lasts, that kind of thing. You can drink moderately. You can drink not at all, right? Like there's all these different things that you can do. And we know that society as a whole can function. We know sometimes there's some good things, right? You have a couple of drinks when you're in a social setting and like it loosens the conversation a little bit, right? So like we know the ups and downs of alcohol. Introducing a highly spiritual, transformative drug into society like it's alcohol is insane, right? Like it's mind-blowingly crazy to just say, well, alcohol has some bad aspects to it. So let's introduce this kind of mind explosion to people with no care, no forethought, no debate. Let's just do it. And that's what we're doing. Like there's no, and that's a big reason why I wrote this book was like, we need to have a debate on this. Like there needs to be this discussion. Yeah. There needs to be a warning sign on this because we're just sleepwalking into this and it makes no sense at all. And it's, if my book's even half right, it's terrifying.
Yeah, I think your book is very right. And I want to point out something and then we'll get into the conclusions of your book.